siyempre, ang pinakamalaking bahagi ng ating pamumuhay na naibalik sa normalidad ay yung pagbabalik ng face-to-face classes. Ito ay nagdala ng significant economic activity at stimulus, lalo na sa retail at informal vendors.
Napakahalaga na nabalik natin ang option na iyon sa ating mga eskwelahan, ang mag-conduct ng 5 days in-person classes. And meron tayong mga schools right now na ganun nga yung ginagawa nila dahil nakita din nila na mas napapadali ang pagtuturo nila.
The DepEd has allowed schools to hold limited in-person classes since August, and come November, schools will have to implement full face-to-face classes.
The government is looking at the possibility of having blended learning extended beyond November.
Meron kaming report na ginagawa ngayon para sa Pangulong Marcos at makapagdesisyon siya kung ano po yung ways forward natin with regard to the options na binibigay natin sa ating mga eskwelahan.
In 3 weeks, full in-person classes will begin. A few days ago, the Department of Education was still drafting a report on which schools are still on blended learning mode. Will they be ready for in-person classes come November? We discussed in this episode of The Chiefs. The Education Department sees their assumption of face-to-face classes as an achievement in its first 100 days. Let's bring to this discussion DepEd spokesman, Attorney Michael Poa. Sir, magandang gabi and welcome back to the Chiefs.
Hi, magandang gabi po. Magandang gabi, sir.
Yes, sir. Sir, si Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star will be joining us in a few minutes. Pero in the meantime po, tayo munang dalawa. Sir, pa-update muna, sir. I understand nga na bumabalangkas pa lamang ng report ang DepEd kung ano yung re-recommenda as far as yung possibility of extending yung blended learning beyond November 2, which was the earlier target for full face-to-face. I'm wondering how much you can tell us about that. Ano bang mukhang direction na pupuntahan natin come November 3 and so on the line?
Opo, that's correct, sir. No? So, as of late last week, nagsimula na tayong humingi ng mga reports sa ating mga regional directors para po malaman natin kung ilang schools yung nag-i-implement ng blended learning at ilan pa rin yung nag-i-implement ng full distance learning as well as the reasons why. Ito po ay part ng report na ginagawa natin at isusumite natin sa ating Pangulo because this discussion will be at a cabinet level at para po makapag-decide ang ating President on how to go forward and the ways forward in terms of dun sa options na binibigay pa rin natin. Sa ngayon po, wala pa po tayong mabibigay ng information other than that. Hopefully, sooner or later, makapag-desisyon na po yung ating, makapag-submit na kami ng report at makapag-desisyon na po yung ating Pangulo ukol dito sa bagay na to.
Yes, sir. Well, of course, sir, we do understand na habang wala pang talakayan sa gabinete, hindi pa nyo pwedeng i-announce kung ano yung magiging desisyon. But at the very least, could you give us an idea kung kamusta yung blended learning in the last 3 months ba? Ilang buwan na ba magmula nang magsimula tayong magano?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Tama po. 3 months na po tayo. No? Now, if you look at the in-person classes that are being held, meaning whether 5-day in-person or yung blended learning that also has obviously an in-person component, nasa around 98% na po ng ating mga schools yung either 5-day in-person or blended learning. Yan po yung latest data na meron tayo.
Ay, sir, just to qualify that, 98% na yung both in-person and blended, tama ho ba? Or may paghihimay?
Yes po, 98. Sorry, sir, I'm not sure if it's my internet connection.
Yes, sir. Pero nga, sir, yung 98%
Sir,
yung...
sorry, I'm not sure if it's my internet connection that's bad. But yes, 98%. Na po yung may in-person component. So that's either 5-day in-person or may blended learning modality po.
Yes, sir. Pero I was wondering, sir, kung meron ng kung may paghihimay as far as yung of the 98%, ilang percent doon yung naka-blended at ilang percent doon yung naka 5-day?
Opo. So yung I think sorry sir no we I think the internet was really bad, but I
Yes,
think
sir.
you were asking if meron pong paghihimay in terms of those na blended
sir.
and those na 5-day po
Yes, sir.
talaga. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct, sir. Tama, sir. Tama, sir.
Opo. So around over 49.5% na po yung talagang 5-day in person, and around 48% po yung may blended learning component.
Almost half and half. Well, let's bring in Ana Pamintuan to Philippine Star. Ami, magandang gabi.
Hi, good evening. Good evening. Sorry I'm late. Tatanong ko lang, what are your biggest takeaways? Kasi malapit na yung umpisa ng full face-to-face, Meron ba kayo nakikitang dapat baguhin by way of health safety protocols or yung pagtuturo mismo para mas madali? Kasi they're all coming from 2 years of lockdowns, di ba?
Opo. Yes, ma'am, that's very correct. In fact, when we were doing the assessments, because we wanted to identify yung ating learning gaps, yung isang malaking nakikita natin is ang affected yung mga grade 1 learners na talaga pong for the past 2 years, wala kasi silang in-person component at hindi nakapasok ng paaralan. So yun po talaga yung tinututukan natin ngayon in terms of reading, mathematics. So that's part of yung ating mga interventions pagdating po sa ating mga learning gaps. In fact, we are about to launch, and this was announced during the Senate budget hearing. Now we are looking to launch a national reading program. Ito po ay talagang tutugon dun sa mga, lalo na dun sa mga nahirapan matuto sa pagbabasa at sa mathematics, because nga wala silang interaction, wala silang school interaction, at hindi sila nakapagbasa kasama ng mga peers nila. So these are, of course, another issue would still be the infrastructure issue. I think we have to admit that and recognize na talagang may kakulangan tayo sa classrooms, and that's why other schools are still implementing yung blended learning. It's really more so because of the shortages in classrooms and infrastructure. As to yung COVID protocols naman po natin, we recently issued in September 20 yung ating latest health guidelines. This is in line, of course, with tayo naman po kasi sa DepEd, we take our cue from the DOH guidelines and the IATF guidelines. So we have issued these latest guidelines that focus on 4 things. So hand washing, disinfection, ventilation, and of course the wearing of face masks. So dun po sa hand washing, dito po sa guidelines, we also instituted yung tinatawag nating group hand washing activities. We believe that this will help yung ating mga bata to make it a habit na maghugas ng kamay, lalong-lalo na with this opportunity that they see their peers washing their hands with them. In terms of ventilation, we have also specified that dapat talaga well-ventilated yung mga classrooms natin. Kung meron man tayong electric fans, dapat itong mga electric fans na to ay nakatapat sa bintana at bukas ang bintana para po to promote yung circulation ng air. Doon naman po sa wearing of face masks, wearing of face masks is still mandatory in enclosed spaces, specifically in classrooms, in laboratories and other school rooms. Nagiging voluntary lang po siya in instances na open spaces at outdoors, pero maganda yung ventilation. So again, kahit naman po maglagay tayo ng mga itong safety protocols, we still have to encourage our learners and teachers to get vaccinated para po dun sa unvaccinated pa. As a primary defense din po sa COVID, and specifically serious COVID and COVID deaths.
So nakita nyo, sufficient na ba yung infrastructure, classrooms, school buildings, pati yung facilities for hand washing? Kasi until before the pandemic, kulang pa rin tayo ng mga facilities, even for hand washing. Wala pa daw na tubig yung maraming schools. Kumusta yung situation ngayon?
Opo. Sa ngayon naman po, before the opening of classes, we really released extra funds in terms of MOOE, kumbaga yung operating expenses ng schools, para dun po sa mga schools na may kakulangan pa rin sa hand washing facilities ay magamit po nila yon. So right now, in fact, just the other day, we launched yung ating OK sa DepEd, which is Oplan Kalusugan. Tomorrow, will be the, I think it's called the Global Hand Washing Day, that we will also be launching in Marikina to promote pa rin po hand washing and ensure that our schools have hand washing facilities, which is mandated under the latest health guidelines.
Pero sir, what can you tell us about the latest in terms of cases of COVID-19 infections within the schools?
Opo. So generally, sir, I think we should accept the fact that in all establishments, not just in schools but in offices and malls, talagang may nagpa-positive.
Yeah.
And hindi natin tinatago yan. But as to the numbers, as the Vice President Secretary of Education also mentioned in a previous interview, we don't want to give inaccurate or conflicting numbers to the public. So what we do is we will refer to the numbers being brought out at the school level dun sa mga LESUs or yung tinatawag na local epidemiology surveillance units ng LGUs. Kasi under po doon sa ating latest guidelines, yung schools will have to report cases na nabalitaan nilang nagka-COVID sa LESUs for LESUs to verify and also to follow up. Sa ngayon naman po, no, so we are again deferring to the LESUs on the number, but as I said, it is almost unavoidable na may mag-positive sa ganyang mga gathering of people. That's why pinapaintim pa natin yung ating health protocols. To what we are watching for, sir, is and ma'am, would be yung mga surge. Yan yung iniiwasan natin kasi yung mag-positive nga sa enclosed space is talagang nandyan na yan, but we are monitoring the situation to avoid any surge that will exhaust yung critical care system natin dito.
Sir, balikan ko lang yung numbers na binigyan nyo kanina. Yung, di ba, remember I was asking about yung paghihimay ng nasa 5-day work week na or school week versus yung nasa blended learning. And mukhang neck and neck, di ba? 49.5 versus 48%. I'm wondering lang, dun sa 48% I think na blended learning, is it that 48% blended learning because they have no choice dahil for any reason dahil for example masyadong masikip yung lugar o kulang yung facilities, or is it a matter of choice lang that they made because they just want to be sure while they still have the chance to have blended learning? I asked that kasi I'm trying to get an idea kung ano talaga yung mas matimbang o mas mabigat o mas marami yung bang pwede na mag 5 days o yung kailangan pa mag modular or blended?
Sir, I really apologize for the connection na napuputol po kasi tayo. But yes, I got the gist of your question. Dun po sa blended learning, yes, a lot of them are just adjustments that are being made dahil nga sa kakulangan sa ating infrastructure to meet the classroom shortage. Karamihan po talaga sa ating mga public schools ay nagbe-blended learning. Aside from that, alam nyo naman po maraming calamities na nagdaan recently, specifically yung lindol sa Abra and Northern Luzon, as well as yung recent typhoon, si Typhoon Carding. So because of these factors, some of our public schools are forced to employ or implement blended learning modalities para po magkasya or matugunan yung shortages natin sa infrastructure. However, that being said, we are in the process of really trying to meet that shortage, whether it be through temporary learning spaces or talking to the LGUs for spaces that we can use in the meantime to hold classes para po dyan sa ating 5-day in-person. We're really geared towards having in-person classes kasi nga po talagang nakita natin and studies will show na may benefit yung interaction between students and physically being in class and physically being monitored and taught by our teachers.
Attorney, balikan ko lang yung narrowing the education gap na nagawa ng pandemic. Nabanggit niyo na yung reading comprehension program na balak niyong i-launch. What about yung gap sa mathematics? Ano yung mga balak niyo to improve comprehension of math?
Yes, ma'am. Tama po kayo, no? Hindi lang talaga reading, pati mathematics is really something that we are falling behind. That one, meron din po tayong sa pipeline na program specifically for mathematics. So similar siya dun sa National Reading Program. Although, admittedly, yung National Reading Program po kasi meron na tayong nabuong TWG or Technical Working Group to solidify the program. The mathematics part is also in the pipeline and we want to do the same. We want to replicate a national program for mathematics. But aside from that, since we are currently doing the K-10 review, what we plan to do is to decongest our current curriculum na sinusunod, to go back to the basics and really focus on those areas para matutukan. And of course, yung kasama po dyan is to really train din our teachers in terms of teaching reading and mathematics. Kasi syempre po, we can always change the curriculum, but pagdating sa teachers, we also have to, kumbaga, kailangan natin pagtuunan ng pansin so that they're also prepared to teach these basic skills.
Yun nga sana itatanong ko, are teachers equipped to teach na mathematics, or will they need upskilling? Do we have enough math teachers in the first place?
Yes, ma'am, you're correct. They do need trainings, and this is something that we are really looking at doing. Kasi nga po yung sinasabi natin, no, that a lot of the teachers are either kasi dahil sa kakulangan natin sa teachers, yung teachers medyo maraming subjects na tinuturo, not necessarily their expertise, and it's not their fault. It's really they need more training, and that's what we plan to do, is to have upskilling programs for them to be equipped to teach these basic skills such as literacy and mathematics.
Sir, dayo naman ako sa ibang issue. I'll go back to a September hearing in Congress nung binubuo po ng Congress yung National Expenditure Program. Nandun si Secretary Duterte at that time. She defended the 150 million confidential fund for DepEd, citing 3 issues that they need to fight, or DepEd needs to fight: sexual grooming of minors, youth recruitment to terrorism, and yung drug use doon po sa schools. Which are, of course, these are all valid issues that can and should be addressed by the DepEd. But I think the question that hasn't been asked or not been pursued is why can't these be programs of the DepEd instead of confidential fund allocations for the DepEd? If these are that important, shouldn't they just be? Shouldn't DepEd have programs that are funded and therefore more accountable instead of being in confidential funds? Na hindi naman po talaga na yung confidential funds. Hindi talaga na audit ng maigi. And even the COA, the COA acknowledges.
I'm sorry, the internet connection is really bad, but I'll try to answer your question. Hopefully, I'm getting through.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So yung confidential funds po kasi, it is under a joint memorandum circular with the DBM.
Yes, sir.
So ang nakasulat po kasi, yes, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. Under that joint memorandum circular, there are two things that are being addressed in that circular. It's intelligence funds for yung ating law enforcement agencies, and then confidential funds para naman sa Department of Education. Yes, so what they are funds to be used to be able to obtain intelligence and surveillance para po doon sa mga criminal activities na nabanggit ng ating Vice President Secretary of Education. So the reason why they are called confidential funds is because that's how they are framed, or that's the term that was given to those funds under the joint DBM memorandum circular. So pursuant or in accordance with that joint memorandum circular, we classify these funds as confidential funds because they will be specifically used for intelligence gathering and surveillance.
Yes, sir. Well, yes, sir. Actually, I agree. And I have read the joint COA DBM circular of 2015, which relates to this. Pero sir, my question is, wouldn't the issues be better served under an actual program of DepEd against recruitment by terrorists, or an actual program by DepEd against grooming of minors, or an actual program of DepEd against drug use? In which case kasi, there are better mechanisms for monitoring and accountability by the COA.
We will take that, definitely will take that in advisement, sir. As you know, these sexual abuse and all these sexual grooming issues came about right before the budget season. It was in fact concerning and alarming that we are getting these accusations of sexual abuse in our schools. So when the confidential funds were proposed, it was specifically targeted towards that. But definitely, I understand what you're saying, sir, and we will definitely take that under advisement.
Well, on another controversy, merong mga istorya ngayon na may balak daw ang DepEd na to rebrand the teaching of martial law into bagong lipunan. Can you comment on this?
Yes, ma'am. The long and short of it is it's not true. Wala pong ganyan na panukala, wala pong ganyan na pagbabago na napag-usapan or na-propose. So when I saw that post, in fact, that post I think was posted on Reddit, and that post was eventually taken down. We would like to issue an official statement in the coming days regarding that. Initially kasi it was just a Reddit post, but definitely po, no, to set the record straight, wala pong ganyang pagbabago o wala man lang pinag-usapan na ganyan. The curriculum review is a very tedious process. It is presented also in consultation with the academe as well as other government agencies, and that is actually what we're doing now dun sa ating K-10 review. So just to belie that post, wala pong ganyan.
Well, apart from yung nabanggit nyo na nga na medyo iibahin ng konti yung curriculum, to focus on STEM, ano pa yung makikita nating changes if there will be any more sa curriculum, basic education?
Opo, ma'am, sorry. Were you asking kung anong iibahin sa curriculum? Sorry po talaga. I really apologize for...
Yeah, apart from the new focus on STEM to intensify efforts to teach STEM subjects, ano pa yung pwedeng makita namin, possible na makita changes in the basic education curriculum?
Thank you, ma'am. I guess the more general statement I can make regarding that, because the review is still ongoing, but we will be decongesting our current curriculum. The observation was that our current curriculum is highly congested with so many learning competencies. Please don't quote me on the number just yet, but I remember hearing the figure 15,000 learning competencies. And so part of that review is to really tone it down and decongest our curriculum, because that also will go hand in hand with what we were saying of going back to the basics, specifically foundational literacy and functional literacy, as well as yung mathematics. But in order to do that, in order to have more time to expand the study time for our learners, we will have to decongest our curriculum. So you will expect, ma'am, that after the K-10, at least the K-10 curriculum is finalized, you can expect a more decongested curriculum. As to the grades 11 and 12, we will be starting the review this coming November.
Okay. Maraming salamat, DepEd spokesman Michael Poa. Sir, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Maraming salamat po. And again, please allow me to apologize for the bad internet connection, sir, ma'am.
It's okay, sir. At least you're there and you're willing and ready to answer the questions, and that's all we need. Salamat, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much, and have a good night.
Thank you.
And we are starting up another conversation right after this break, so please stay with us.
nakikitang mali si Justice Secretary Boying Remulla sa issue ng red tagging at bahagi lang daw ito ng proseso ng demokrasya.
So red tagging is a very, very difficult term to probably debate about because it is about criticism. It is criticism to people who also criticize, or his main vocation is to criticize government. If you can dish it out, you should be able to take it. That, for me, is probably the essence of democracy. Are we not allowed to criticize our critics too?
Justice Secretary Boying Remulla says the Marcos administration is strengthening the country's human rights mechanisms, including the prison reform program.
What we ask of you, the Human Rights Council and partners, is to listen to us, to understand the context of our challenges, besides us on the ground, not above us from afar. To trust that we know best what is good for our people and to work with us to realize the vision of human rights and justice for all.
And welcome back to the Chiefs. Before we bring in our next guest, let's first check what's on the headlines tomorrow. Ami, well, a big story tonight. Yung
Siyempre, bombshell of the day, ano?
Yeah.
Inaresto ang eldest son ng Secretary of Justice. Pero okay naman yung for drugs or drug possession.
And quite a sizable amount of drugs, and not just any kind of marijuana, but it's Kush, which is high-grade marijuana.
Yes, from the US. At 1.3 million daw yung estimated street value, no?
But what do we know so far dun sa kaso niya?
Pero maganda naman yung, sinabi papailan daw pero wala pa yata, na-file na ba? But anyway, maganda yung response naman ni Secretary Boying Remulla, no? Well, starting with of course, the heartache of a family na nagkaganyan, and he promised that he will let justice take its course and he will respect the system of justice in our country.
And to quote the secretary, sabi niya, I will not intervene in nor influence my son's predicament, and I have not done so in any way. A person should always face the consequences of their actions, and I will let justice take its own course. I thank the PIDEA for doing their job without fear or favor. I have no conflict with them.
Yung kapatid niya, of course, si John Vic Remulla, issued a similar statement earlier, no? Kasi pauwi na kasi si Justice Secretary, kaya handwritten yung kanyang note na pinadala sa media.
Yeah, but of course, the other part of the context here is the irony of everything. Na si Remulla just went to the U.S. to defend the Duterte government, the government's drug war, and then this story comes out.
Hindi naman to defend, but to explain the human rights situation, the human rights policy of the new administration, di ba? Yun ang pagpunta niya ron. Kasi I don't think, dinefend ba niya yung, hindi naman niya sinasabing defend, but sinasabi lang niya sa ICC, you let us do our job at kaya naman daw natin, which has always been a stand of the Philippine government.
Okay, and as promised, we bring in our next guest, Commission on Human Rights Executive Director Jacqueline De Guia. Ma'am, thank you for joining us and welcome back to the Chiefs.
Good evening.
Good evening, Ed. Good evening, Ami.
Yes.
And good evening, everyone, to our televiewers.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, we have a lot of things on the table. We have a lot of stories and issues on the table. But let me start off with this. Just a few days ago, Secretary Remulla said before the Human Rights Committee that, well, in effect, I suppose you might say it's about red tagging. Are we not allowed to criticize our critics too? Is it a one-way street? So sabi niya, it's par for the course. If you can dish it out, you should be able to take it. That, for me, is probably the essence of democracy. How does this statement strike you in the context of all this discussion about red tagging?
Well, Ed, it's more than criticisms, definitely. When you talk about labeling, you're more concerned about the very sweeping and broad generalization that everyone who criticizes is an enemy of the state or would seek to overthrow the government, whereas that is the contrary, no? In a democratic society, whenever you criticize or whenever you express dissent, as long as it is made within the bounds of law, then that's allowed. That's actually protected speech under the Constitution. But what we fear about red tagging is the overall and broad generalization that anyone who voices dissent or anyone who voices criticism is now tagged as a communist, worse, communist terrorist. And that's the evil that we seek to protect when it comes to red tagging, that legitimate human rights defenders, legitimate human rights advocates, or those who just want to speak their mind freely, as long as it is done democratically or it's done within the framework of the rule of law, is now endangered because they are now lumped together with a group that is perceived or that is taken as the enemy of the state.
Ms. De Guia, the 100 days, the first 100 days are over. Siyempre, iba rin naman yung sinasabi at iba yung action. What is your assessment by way of human rights, respect for human rights? What is your assessment of the first 100 days of the new Marcos administration?
You know, I would say that it's too early to say, no, but an improvement in contrast to the previous administration is, of course, there are encouraging statements. However, we need more time to see whether it will translate into actual implementation. However, the statements are encouraging so far, and we'd like to see it follow through. And of course, it's a tough job. Coming from many of the challenges in the previous administration. And so we'd like to give them ample time. But of course, we'd also like them to understand the importance and the gravity of the situation. Much rests upon the current administration in making sure that true reforms, genuine reforms, are really implemented so that we are able to convince the public at large, as well as international mechanisms, that we are serious and we are thoroughly addressing the challenges that we have been confronted with in recent years.
Well, let's focus on the most controversial aspect of law enforcement in the previous administration, which is, of course, the drug war. So, actual law enforcement in the past 100 days. What's your assessment?
Well, it's very encouraging that the chief PNP did say that there's going to be a different approach in the campaign against drugs, and that is well appreciated. And then, of course, we saw also their non-adherence to death penalty, which is again a good thing for human rights advocacy. And then we did see that there are operations that have been aimed at large suppliers, and that is more again that we would like to see because we've been harping during the past that we have to cut the chains in terms of supply and go after the big fishes, and we'd like to see more of that happening. And then of course there's the added impetus of making sure that there's really a paradigm shift in terms of approaching the campaign against drug. In the UNJP, one of the technical working groups there, headed by the DDB, is a human rights-based approach to drug prevention. And one of the key steps there is to decriminalize drug use in some instances, do away with a more criminal approach or perspective when it comes to drug use, and look at it from the rehabilitation side or from the right to health perspective. And of course, we'd like to push for more rehabilitation at the community level. And the use of the terminologies is, of course, also problematic, and which we would like to see more improvements in the future.
Okay. Ma'am, let me shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the new appointments to the CHR. You have a new chairperson, among other people. Can you tell us about any possible changes or amendments in the direction of the Commission on Human Rights under this new leadership?
You know, Ed, I'm confident that the CHR will still remain as a strong credible and relevant institution. We do have two new officers within the CHR, Chairperson Richard Palpalato, as well as Commissioner Beda Epres. Both have strong backgrounds in the legal profession. Both come from the bureaucracy or from government service. Chair Richard rose from the ranks. He's had experience at the Office of the Ombudsman. He also used to work at the Department of Social Welfare and Development and therefore has a strong advocacy on children and women's rights. And then he did also come from the NPS. And so we want to make sure that all the gains that we have been able to do during the past years are sustained. And then, of course, Commissioner Beda comes from the Office of the Ombudsman. He served there for 27 years. And in other jurisdictions, national institutions such as the CHR are also like the Office of the Ombudsman. We would have that, for example, in Timor-Leste. And this kind of background lends pluralism to the CHR, and that will also seek to strengthen our protection mandate. So I'm definitely sure that we will remain to be an independent body, that we will remain faithful to our mandate in terms of protection and promotion of human rights.
But I also asked a question in the context of the last 6 years. In the last 6 years, issues of human rights, as well as people who fight for human rights, groups that are allied with the human rights causes, have been demonized in the last 6 years by the previous administration. Do you see any changes as far as that is concerned, as far as how the administration views the issue of human rights, views the roles of human rights groups, and so on down the line?
You know, Ed, it's really very unfortunate that human rights defenders, human rights advocates have been demonized, and even the very notion of human rights has been attacked, which I find personally very ridiculous and absurd. No, the fact that we are humans and the fact that we enjoy these rights and they give essence to our life in itself is very difficult to understand. In this administration, we are cautiously optimistic. The statements have been very encouraging so far. And as I mentioned a while ago, there is ample time and there is a great opportunity for the current administration to prove itself, to differentiate itself from the past. The president said so himself, that he should be distinguished from his ancestors and that he should be given a fair chance. And I'm sure the human rights community would like to see more of that. And again, I reference back to the UNJP because, again, one of the core deliverables there is a democratic space for civil society organizations. And that would include, of course, also strengthening the human rights community together with a strong, credible CHR. And that has been highlighted during the Human Rights Council event in Geneva.
Ms. De Guia, during the previous administration, former Senator Laila de Lima became a symbol of the human rights situation in the Philippines. Do you see her plight improving under the current administration?
You know, definitely not. No, if we would look at the past events just last week, it's very alarming to say the least. You wouldn't expect that in a detention cell where she is heavily guarded and where she supposedly should be safe, she would be held hostage. And we are very gravely concerned about her condition. We also have to factor in that she has languished in jail for a very long period of time. It is very unjust. It is very unfair for her. She's also into her old age right now. She's a senior citizen already. And the fact that the cases are not advancing fast enough is in itself, you know, a violation of her right. And that's why we'd like to urge the government to look into her case, to revisit her case, and more importantly, to guarantee her rights. No, we do hope that she will be given more options other than those that are available at her to her right now. Probably a house arrest would be very viable at this point. She does have a medical condition, and we'd like to make sure that she is safe safe and she is freed immediately. We are one with all those who call for her immediate release.
Well, a house furlough, quote unquote, has been mentioned in her case, and some quarters find it noteworthy that the president himself, President Marcos, called her after the hostage taking to ask about what could be done if she needed anything. What do you see in that? Are we reading too much into it?
Well, I saw her. I saw her tweet this evening, no, and she did respect the fact that the president won't intervene into her case, but she does have this very reasonable plea that at least the president tells the DOJ that they should at least allow Ragos, which is her constitutional right. To make sure that all the available witnesses that are available at her side are given opportunity also to provide their testimony. So we think that it's reasonable under the circumstances. Everyone should be given a fair day in court. Everyone should be given an opportunity to defend themselves. And if this is the list that can be done within the framework of the law, we have to emphasize that, then at least it sounds very reasonable. It's something that the government can look into and will enhance their image in terms of human rights protection and promotion.
Director De Guia, you also understand that you're investigating the slay of veteran broadcaster Percy Lapid. What can you tell us about your investigation so far?
Yes, very alarming again that Percy Lapid was killed. We do understand that he was hard-hitting commentator, but nonetheless, that does not justify the violence committed against him. We are conducting an investigation. We have directed our investigators to be on the field nonstop since the beginning of this week, because we just want to make sure that we are able to exhaust all possible remedies that are available to the Lapid family. And it's quite alarming to note that despite the very hefty bounty that is made available to the public, still no arrests, still no acts of surrender. And we appreciate the swift response of the PNP, of all other government agencies. Many have paid visits, many have expressed their support for the investigation of Percy Lapid. But in itself, when taken all together, it's just quite alarming that you have the full power of the state, the resources of the state, a hefty bounty, and yet no apprehensions. So we are concerned about this development, and we do hope that this will not create a culture of tolerance and will not be succeeded by any act of violence in the future. Because again, we draw comfort, but we hope that it will be followed by concrete measures following the statement of the president that he does protect media rights.
Well, speaking of media rights, what's your assessment of the state of press freedom and freedom of expression under the Marcos 2.0?
Well, it has become difficult as in the past years. It has there are clearly a lot of challenges. No, it's not a safe and an enabling environment, I might say, for journalists. There's this fear of speaking out. Of course, there's disinformation, misinformation that we have to counter, and then of course there is the proliferation of social media, which has been very difficult in terms of assessing the truth, no? And therefore, these are clear challenges that the current administration will have to look into. Again, statements have been made. We look forward to concrete measures being rolled out in the future so that journalists and media practitioners will really feel that they are valued, will really feel enabled to do their profession without fear or rancor.
What about transparency in government, access of the media to accurate information? What do you think of the situation at this point?
Well, I think there's always a room for improvement when it comes to government work. We in the bureaucracy endeavor to do that. There is the FOI, but again, we need to make sure that this information is readily available, it's transparent, it's accessible, and there's no bureaucratic red tape when accessing this information. And if, for example, feedback is given about our work, then we are not too onion-skinned about it because it really comes within the territory of public office.
Ma'am, balikan ko lang yung, yung bagong appointments ng Pangulo doon sa CHR, specifically kay Attorney Richard Palapalatok. Si former Commission on Human Rights Chairperson Eta Rosales expressed some grave concerns over the appointment of Palapalatok dahil according to her, he has no experience or track record in human rights issues. Of course, you do not speak for Chairman Palpalatok, but do we know how the chairman has reacted to these concerns? Has he addressed any of these concerns, for example, to the CHR personnel and officials?
So, of course, we do respect the opinion of former Chairperson Loretta Eta Rosales. She does speak from experience. However, we would like to stress that many of our commissioners, many of our previous chairperson also didn't have the necessary background in human rights work. And yet, they were not prevented from doing good work afterwards. Say, for example, Senator Laila de Lima was an election lawyer and previously did not know much about human rights work. And yet, we see her as the face and the champion of human rights right now. Chair Richard, when he got wind of all the feedback, did say that he remains committed to prove everyone wrong, to make sure that he's able to engage with everyone. In fact, we've been engaging with all sectors of the human rights community. He's been very active during the past few weeks and days. And we will be engaging with many more actors as he has committed to make sure that all of these gains made in the recent years are sustained and his own vision will also materialize in the next 6 years. He did say that he has strong advocacy on child rights, women's rights, as well as would like to also highlight IP rights. As well as ESCR. He was informed about our work on climate change, and he would want to pursue that too.
Director, the 19th Congress also marked its first 100 days. Is there any particular piece of legislation that you would want them to prioritize to promote human rights? Any particular, you're one or two?
Yeah, we have a long list, We did submit our legislative agenda to Senator Tolentino, and he was quite surprised that we had a long list. But just to name a few, of course, the CHR Charter, we'd like to see that happen. The Human Rights Defenders Bill is very much necessary. The Internally Displaced Persons Act is also very crucial. And then we're talking about non-discrimination and LGBTQI rights. So we'd like to see the SOGI bill and the Comprehensive Anti-Discrimination Bill. These are just some of the bills that we would like to be enacted as laws. And we do hope that the death penalty will not be reimposed in the Philippines.
Yung CHR Charter, can you be more specific about what you want changed in the current situation in the Commission right now?
So right now, we don't have a CHR charter. A CHR charter would guarantee that the CHR remains to be a strong, credible, and important institution in the country. And this is something that was stressed upon during our subcommittee accreditation. And as I mentioned in my previous guesting, we're going to have our accreditation next year. And we've always been a status A accredited human rights institution. And to be downgraded to status B just because we don't have, say, for example, a CHR charter, just because we don't have independent commissioners and chairperson, and we do hope that they're going to be completed soon. I just like to emphasize that because we're still waiting for 3. But this will all be necessary so that we will be able to perform our work better better in the next coming years.
Would you want quasi-judicial powers for the commission?
You know, many would say that the CHR is a toothless tiger, but there's been a robust discussion within the CHR. And we do see that having prosecutorial powers will be in conflict with some of our mandates. We do belong in the first pillar of the criminal justice system, and that's in the investigation pillar. And we do see that we're effective there. And we leave the prosecution to the Office of the Ombudsman and to the NPS.
Ma'am, one last question from me. Do you see any need to rebuild the credibility, I don't know if that's the right word, but to rebuild the image of human rights as a concept, as well as the image of human rights advocates and human rights groups in this country after the last 6 years? Do you see the need for that? Is that in any of your plans in the near future? Or do you see not? Okay, go ahead.
Definitely, Edno. That's something that has been very apparent as early as 2016 when CHR, when human rights, the very notion of human rights was being attacked. And it's very sad, but that we have the historical context that would explain, for example, the creation of the CHR, or others would attribute the involvement of human rights. But if you were to look at the other jurisdictions, other countries, where we did not really come from the 1970 to 1986 period of martial law, then you would not have that kind of narrative. Human rights would have that very neutral, very beautiful notion and concept that caters to human rights per se. And therefore, we have to seize back the narrative. We have to make sure that human rights is understood completely as it should be. And I think we have to, like what the CHR has been doing over the past few years, has been to project a message that hinges on simple, positive, and visual messaging about human rights. And it should be easily understood by the public. It should be something that they can relate to. They should see it more than the context of, for example, the campaign against drugs, because that has been a very divisive issue. They should look at the whole gamut of human rights, look at ESCR, economic, social, cultural rights, realize that, for example, the right to food is something that everyone is affected with. The right to livelihood is something that impacts everyone. Climate change, for example, impacts everyone. And if everyone tries to realize that beyond politics, beyond our historical context, then I'm sure that we'll have a better understanding and a better appreciation at the end of the day about human rights.
Okay, Commission on Human Rights Executive Director Jacqueline De Guia, ma'am, maraming salamat for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
And that's it for the Chiefs. We hope what is discussed here will keep the conversation going. I'm Ed Lingao.
I'm Mami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.